Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Luke Johnson from Noetic, the Humanities Teaching Device, and I am back with Jennifer Avery in the second installment of our conversation on Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. But before we do that, I want to say something. Everyone who works for Noetic right now is kind of working on a dream, hopes, aspirations, and the least I can do is the contributors that make their time available, their knowledge, their brains available, is to give them an opportunity to promote their real life gigs. And Jennifer is quite the editor. She is she does writing as well. And I just wanted everybody to know that they can reach out to you if they needed any help in regards to specific services that you offer. So I just want to give you the floor to give your contact information and maybe describe in a little bit greater detail what kind of things you do during your daily life.
Okay. Well, I am an editor. I'm a content editor, which means I do more than proofread. I go through your manuscript and tell you where you have continuity issues, where you have dialogue issues, things like that. So I look very carefully at the text, and so I'm a content editor. I'm very thorough. If anybody has a book they need me to edit, mostly I do fiction. I can do poetry and nonfiction as well. It is you can email me at Avery. That's Javery. S, the letter S as in Sam, C as in cat, E as in Edward, or at gmail.com.
So Javery, SCE?
At gmail.com.
Excellent. And you also do tutoring from time to time, is that right?
Yeah, I have been known to tutor. I can tutor for creative writing. I can tutor for grammar and literature. I can do a little bit of history, but mainly my tutoring is in grammar and literature and language arts.
All right, excellent. And I can attest to Jennifer's fastidiousness. She does a great attention to detail in anything that she does, as anyone who knows who's been listening to these broadcasts over the past year or so. So why don't we get into it? What are we going to try to accomplish in our second installment of Pride and Prejudice?
Okay, well, we're going to get as far as we can, hopefully through chapter 12. Right now we're on chapter 5, and we had just the Bennets were visiting, or the Bennet women were visiting Sir William Lucas and his family, and of course Sir William Lucas's daughter, eldest daughter, is Charlotte Lucas, who's a very good friend of Lizzie's, and Charlotte is a really interesting character too. Lizzie is very witty, and she's very smart and sharp, and for the most part, she's a little bit, she's not quite as practical as Charlotte is. Charlotte is extremely practical. She's very smart, and but the thing about Charlotte is that she is nearly 27 years old. Back in those days, 27 was pretty much was way past your expiration date. Most women got married at around anywhere from 16 to 19 years old, and Charlotte was 27 at this point. So that comes into play here in a little bit about how. Let me see here. Trying to think where I am.
Well, that's okay. No, I remember one of the passages being like, "She is almost 3 and 20." Like, yeah. I don't know what I would do if I was unmarried, if I was 3 and 20.
Yeah, 3 and yes, she's 23. That's right.
Yeah, I don't know what you were doing at 23, but I don't know if I would have been good husband material at 23.
Yeah, there's no way I could have gotten married at 23. I just finished college at that age, and most people have just finished college at that age and don't even know what it's like to be an adult. But back in these days, women went straight from their father's house to their husband's house. That's not how things are now, and that's why it was probably a little bit easier for women to get married at that age, and also it was important to have a lot of children, especially for this land for these landed gentry folks whose wealth and property is inherited, and they have to keep the family going so they can keep the money going. And so they wanted to have a lot of children, so they start the women early. and a lot of time, and it was not unheard of for a man to be well in his 30s and have never been married, but marry a 16-year-old girl, and that was not uncommon, and that's just how it was. And I'm glad it's not that way now, but but in any case. So we've got Charlotte Lucas, and they're talking about Mr. Darcy, and Charlotte's a little bit more practical when it comes to Mr. Darcy. She's noticed that they're talking about him at the ball and everything, and how he behaved. And Charlotte is a little bit more forgiving than the rest of the family. So yes.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Just for the sake of orientation, how old are these characters in general? Like, I don't have a good sense for how old Mr. Darcy is.
I think Darcy is probably close to 30. I think they mentioned it at some point, but I can't remember exactly how old he is. He might be a little bit younger than that. I think Mr. Bingley's around 26, so Darcy's probably 27, 28. Lizzie is 21, or actually I think she's 20, and Jane might be 21 or 22. So there you go.
Thank you.
Okay, so in any case, for chapter 5 is basically just a review of the ball with the Lucases, and of course Lizzie's mom, Mrs. Bennet, is just crapping all over Mr. Darcy to the Lucases about how bad he was and how disdainful he was of Lizzie, and Lizzie's response, and Charlotte says, his pride does not offend me so much as pride often does, because there is an excuse for it. One cannot wonder that so very fine a young man with family, fortune, everything to his favor, should think highly of himself. If I may so express it, he has a right to be proud. And Lizzie says that is very true, and I could easily forgive his pride if he had not mortified mine. And so the summary of all this from Charlotte is that, he's kind of conceited and prideful, but he's got all this going for him. He's got a lot of money. He's got a good family with an old name, and so he kind of has a right to be proud. And that was the attitude of the aristocracy back in those days. It's just like if you had family and money and everything going for you, you were the very cream of society. Money and family were everything. And so those people were looked up to, whether they were jerks or not, a lot of times. And so that's just how it went. But Charlotte sees the practical side of things a lot. So that's pretty much all of chapter 5. And on to chapter 6. If I can remember where that is. Okay. We get a little, the ladies of Longbourn, that is the Bennets, go and visit with the Bingleys. That's just the women, Miss Bingley and Mrs. Hurst, Mr. Bingley's sisters. And then they return the visit. And through these visits, they kind of get to know each other. And we have a nice little, and they talk about how the two sisters, how the Bingley sisters are like Jane, because she's very sweet tempered and she's pretty and she's nice to look at. But she says that the younger sisters not worth speaking to. A wish to be better acquainted with them was expressed towards the two eldest. So, but the two sisters, the Bingley sisters, say that the mother is kind of vulgar and an idiot. The younger sisters are idiots. But the two eldest sisters, that being Jane and Lizzie, are fairly tolerable. You know, they're nice to talk to. They're not rude or vulgar or too silly. And so they kind of feel like, you know, we'll give them some attention. And, you know.
So for clarification purposes,
mm-hmm.
what did being an idiot, vulgar, and silly, what did that look like in this context? Because being an idiot, vulgar, and silly today might not look like it did back then.
And it doesn't. Well, actually, really, there's not a whole lot of difference now I think about it.
All right. Well, explain yourself.
Okay, well, what makes Mrs. Bennet so vulgar and silly is that she is very loud in her praise. She's very loud in her distaste. She's not very well composed. Whatever is in her mind, it just flies out of her mouth. Not thinking about who it might offend, who might hear it, and she doesn't and she doesn't really have any empathy, and she doesn't think about what it's like to be in somebody else's position. And all that she wants is to get her daughters married, and she doesn't really check the behavior of the youngest two, and that would have been considered very, you know, just neglectful in a way, because the younger girls are not proper ladies. And the reason the younger girls are not proper ladies is because they seem to have no sense of decorum. Like, all they want to do is chase men. They want to chase officers, and all they talk about is men and how attractive they are, and you know, and how much money they make, and all this. That's all they care about. They don't really take any time to improve themselves. All they see is how they are received by men.
Now, Jennifer, why would you go and say, I mean, I don't think you're giving women in today's society enough credit. Why would you go and say that nothing's really changed?
Well, I mean, things have changed, of course, because women have more clout in society than we used to. But now, and this is just me. This is my personality.
That's fine.
This is how I was raised. I have a great disdain for women who aren't careful about their behavior towards men, because not only can it be dangerous in today's society, but it can also I like decorum. I like poise. And if all you're doing is chasing after dudes and dressing to attract men and doing it just for the men, and have no interest in anything but that, then you feel no need to improve yourself, because you're going to get the attention. And for women who are like that, and of course this is usually mostly younger women. Older women, as we get older, we get over that. Even if we're not married, we get over that. But it's like their reason for existence is to please men, and that is the most anti-feminist thing I can think of. You need to please yourself first, and that's the main problem that I have with it, is that you need to please yourself first, and then if the man likes it, then that's awesome. I'm going to give you a quick anecdote, and then we'll go on, I guess, unless you have another question. I remember very well. I was in a bar in Rome, Georgia. I never wear makeup, by the way. I never wear makeup. I don't dress particularly provocatively unless I'm in the mood to. And even then, it's reserved. But a girl came up to me, this random woman I didn't even know, while I was in the bathroom, and literally cornered me and said, "You would be so pretty if you would just wear makeup. Men would do anything for you if you would just take some effort to make them like you." And I remember looking at that woman and holding myself back from slapping the crap out of her. And I told her, "Look, I'm happy with myself as I am. And if a man doesn't like it, then I don't have time for him." And she just couldn't understand this. This is what I'm talking about. Earn your own way, do your own thing, make yourself happy. Maybe the men will follow. If they don't, then I don't know, but you'll be okay, I'm sure.
Well, that's what this book is about, right? This book is about, because Lizzie is unlike this, right? Like, she's unlike all these silly, vulgar ways, right?
Exactly. Sorry.
Yeah, but tying it back into the text, I mean, the thing that I find interesting, if she's coming out of this atmosphere that is breeding this superficial mentality and this anti-feminist mentality, and I do remember there being a part in the novel where people are scrutinizing her and they're wondering how she became so sophisticated without the help of a governess.
Yeah.
What explains Lizzie's uncommon sophistication?
Well, she didn't have her mother is silly and ridiculous, but the father is very intelligent and smart, and he's sardonic and kind of, likes to make fun of people, and that's kind of where Lizzie gets her ability to read and find some sort of fun in watching people, and she gets that from her father.
So you think it's genetic? You think it's genetic?
It could be genetic, and it could be a result of her of seeing what her mother was like and not liking it. Just because you were born to a certain family, it doesn't mean that you can't recognize something for what it is if you assess and compare it to others. Like Lizzie would have she had one of her we meet one of her better influences later on in her Aunt Gardner. And Aunt Gardner is a marvelous character. Aunt Gardner is a very intelligent and ladylike woman, and she and Lizzie are a lot alike. And Lizzie probably would have learned some things from being in her company too, and from being around people like Charlotte. And the other families in the neighborhood. She would have had an opportunity to compare her mother's behavior with other people's behavior. And so, if you're decently intelligent and watch people in the way that Lizzie does, then you can see these distinctions and act accordingly. That's my theory of how she ended up like that anyway. On
the other side of the coin, do we know anything about Darcy's family to understand what gave him his particular level of emotional and mental IQ?
The only members of Darcy's family that we meet are his sister Georgiana, his aunt, Lady Catherine de Bourgh, and his cousin Fitzwilliam, Colonel Fitzwilliam. Okay, and we don't know anything about his parents except that everyone in his neighborhood liked them, and that his father was a very good man. That's all we know. But the main reason Darcy has this kind of heightened sense of himself is because he's rich. He's rich and he's from an old family, and he probably got some of that from Lady Catherine de Bourgh, who is the most pompous character in the entire book, and she's awful. But Darcy, in the same way that Lizzie can see where her parents are wrong, Darcy can see how Lady Catherine is wrong. And his father probably, everybody says he's a good man, and the housekeeper even says that he's good to his tenants and all of his servants, and he pays them well, and he's very friendly to them. He probably would have learned that from his father. But the way that he is in society around people that he doesn't know. And remember, we talked about how Darcy is probably an introvert. He just doesn't know how to be around people he doesn't know. And I think that is a combination of his station as a rich man from an old, important family, and the fact that he's introverted. And he just doesn't know how to talk to people.
Well, I think it'd be a fantastic paper for someone to put together for one of their courses if they wanted to look at the similarities between Lizzie and Darcy and talk about is there some sort of genetic transmission, if there is some sort of conditioning going on there.
Yeah.
I've sort of derailed the conversation enough, so I'll let you get back to the text.
Okay, well, so in any case, where were we? So we get a nice little description of Jane. Remember, we're talking about Jane. Jane is a very sweet-tempered, pretty girl, and she's very introverted too. She's shy, and Charlotte points out that it's clear that Mr. Bingley likes Jane. But does she like him? Because a lot of people are not, she's not really showing that she likes him in the way that most men, like one of Charlotte's best speeches, she says, one of her best speeches, she says, wait a minute. Jane, okay, though Bingley and Jane meet tolerably often, it is never for many hours together, and as they always see each other in large mixed parties, it is impossible that every moment should be employed in conversing together. Jane should therefore make the most of every half hour in which she can command his attention. When she is secure of him, there will be leisure for falling in love as much as she chooses. So basically she's saying she needs to show more affection than she feels, just so she can make sure that Bingley is encouraged enough. She says that happiness in marriage is is entirely a matter of chance. If the dispositions of the parties are ever so well known to each other or ever so similar beforehand, it does not advance their felicity in the least. They always continue to grow sufficiently unlike afterwards to have their share of vexation. And it is better to know as little as possible of the defects of the person with whom you are to pass your life. So Charlotte's basically saying, it doesn't matter how well they know each other before they get married. They just need to get married, and then, they'll figure it out. And this was a very practical attitude for this period of time, because most marriages were arranged, and you were lucky if you liked the person that you married. There was a sort of culture of romance and flirtation that did happen in this sort of society, but the thing is there's a lot more weight put on getting to know someone now than there was back then, because you're going to end up married to who you're supposed to be married to. Yeah.
So I think there are virtues and drawbacks to these are marriage arrangements and things like that. And I wonder if you could shed some historical light on this. Because so many of them went into these marriages barely knowing one another, and they could do so with such a gay spirit. I mean, such a carefree spirit about it. There wasn't the solemnity or soberness to marriage that I think, so many of us, or at least how it's portrayed in these novels, would take the institution. I've just hearing you talk, thinking to myself, is that because they all, is that because there was like this escape hatch mentality, or like, well, at least I can be an adulterer? How rampant was adultery, and how socially accepted was it to have like a mistress on the side or something like that? Because forever is a long time to rush into these marriages that are arranged, or if you only know someone for like 3 weeks, like.
Yeah.
Were people thinking like, well, if I'm miserable, I can always just have a mistress?
Well, yeah, there's really, it'd probably be really difficult to tell how many men had mistresses back in those days, because it was definitely frowned upon. Marriage was a very sober, once you were married, and if you strayed, then that was the ruin of your reputation and your entire family's reputation. Like, for instance, Lydia goes off and gets married, goes off with Mr. Wickham later on, and they live together in London before they get married. Now, understandably, this is probably a bigger scandal than adultery. But if you had a mistress and somebody found out, you could lose your position. You could lose your reputation. You could lose all your friends. But it's unrealistic to say that very few men had mistresses, because there probably were a lot of men that had mistresses. It's just that they were extremely discreet, or they went to brothels. That was fairly common, and it was not uncommon for a man back in those days to have to visit a brothel before they get married, when they're young. And actually, it was much more acceptable than, say, Lydia going off with Wickham. Men could get away with it. Women couldn't. And so there was a culture of adultery, but if anybody found out, then it could be disastrous, especially in this higher society of the gentry. So there you go. But in any case, and most of the time, it really depended on the man. Some men, it was kind of seen as duty. You have to do your duty, and part of your duty is being faithful to your wife, whether you like her or not.
So, I mean, were people just less sexualized back then, or like, how did people?
Probably.
I mean, can we say? I mean, there's got to be something profound here about the construction of society, right? There's got to be something that we can say about how that idea doesn't fly in our society today. Is it because we're more secular? Is it because we're bombarded with hypersexualization through all the media that we consume? I mean, what would account for people being, aside from the dramatic fear of losing their property and their esteem in the eyes of the community? I mean, was that enough to just be like, oh, I probably shouldn't do that?
Probably not, because the thing is that people have always been sexual, and think about the orgies in ancient Rome. Certain ancient cultures that valued fertility goddesses and gods and things like this. But in this society, in the society of the Regency era, sex was not out there. People were probably bumping uglies all over the place, but it just wasn't discussed. It just wasn't discussed. Like, the men might talk to each other about it. And again, I'm talking about gentry. I'm not talking about the rest of the society. I'm talking about the people in this book. Is the women had a woman could do nothing except be with her husband. And if she did anything other than that, then she was destroyed. her entire reputation was destroyed. Her family's reputation was destroyed. And so women were definitely, what's the word I'm looking for? They were not liberated at this point. The women, if a woman had any sort of affair, then it was probably carried out in the utmost secret. And if anybody found out, like I said, she was done. Now for men, like I said, many men would go to brothels. It was probably very common. There's even like a modern sequel to Pride and Prejudice where they talk about Darcy maybe having a love child somewhere, and that did happen.
What is that sequel that you're referring to?
I don't remember the name of it. I think I sold my copy because I didn't like it.
let me look it up while you're talking.
There are multiples of it. There are multiple sequels to Pride and Prejudice that modern writers have attempted. But in any case, sex was not as out there back in those days as it is now. And so that puritanical attitude to sex reigned supreme over the gentry. And like I said, anything that happened was carried out in utmost secret. And even women's dresses didn't really show their figures very much. And, you could kind of see, because they weren't like super loose or flouncy like a lot of the earlier fashions were. But most of the dresses kind of went straight down. They had empire waistlines, and then it went straight down from there. So you couldn't really see the shape of a woman, and like women's sexuality was very much repressed. Men's sexuality was kind of suppressed. So
kind of.
Yeah. So that's pretty much the gist of that. I think that if that answers your question, I hope it does.
Yeah.
And that is a big deal here in Pride and Prejudice and in all of Jane Austen's novels. I mean, she doesn't talk about sex per se, but there's a lot under the surface going on that she's managed to capture through conversation and scenes with heroes and heroines. Like, for instance, in I haven't read Mansfield Park. I know the gist of it, but in Mansfield Park, one of the characters runs off with another one while she's married to somebody else, and that causes just uproar, absolute uproar. And so Jane Austen would tackle issues like this that a lot of writers would not have. Like, Anne Radcliffe would have done more, but Anne Radcliffe wrote these Gothic novels. So, but in any case, does that answer your question?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And there's a lot of sequels to Pride and Prejudice.
There are a ton of them. And
Dana Darcy wasn't the one you were referring to, was it?
I don't think so. I don't remember. I think I got rid of my copy of it.
There's a ton.
Yeah, but yeah, there's a ton of them. Even Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. Come on, which I haven't seen yet. But in any case, but yeah, a lot of these modern authors did kind of take on the sexuality that was just under the surface with Jane Austen, and to me, that just ruins the whole freaking thing. That's why I couldn't make it through that book. Because you have to leave something to the imagination sometimes, and that's why I love reading these books, because you have that sort of sexual tension without it being out in the open for everybody to see. And there's something very sensual about that to me. And so that's why I hate how they've done some of these books that are sequels, because you have like Darcy and Lizzie like having sex in the carriage after their wedding and everything. It's like, no, don't do that. Just leave something to the imagination, will you please? So, but in any case, that's just my opinion. But in any case, let's see, where were we? Okay, so we have a little bit of this conversation with Charlotte and Lizzie, and then we get a little, and then Austen does something a little bit weird here in chapter 6, in which she kind of switches to Mr. Darcy really quick for a minute, and then we get our first hint that Darcy likes Lizzie. He talks about how it's mentioned how he finds that that the expression in her eyes, an intelligent expression in her eyes that were dark and uncommonly intelligent, he says, and that captivates him about Lizzie. And this is the first time, and he says though he had detected with a critical eye more than one failure of perfect symmetry in her form, he was forced to acknowledge her figure to be light and pleasing, and in spite of his asserting that her manners were not those of the fashionable world, he was caught by their easy playfulness. Of this she was perfectly unaware. To her, he was only the man who made himself agreeable nowhere, and who had not thought her handsome enough to dance with. He began to wish to know more of her, and as a step towards conversing with her himself, attended to her conversation with others. And so this is where we see the similarity between Darcy and Lizzie, where we first see it. I think they're in Lucas Lodge, and they're having like a card, like they're playing cards and dinner, which is something that they would do a lot back in those days. They'd invite everybody in the neighborhood to dinner, and then they go and play cards with each other, and that's what this is. Mr. Darcy starts paying attention to Lizzie's conversations, just the same way that Lizzie has been watching him and everybody else. And so you see, we have this kind of similarity in their observation of people and their understanding of, people's minds and characters. And so, in any case, during this party, Lizzie catches Mr. Darcy listening to her, and she calls him on it. But Charlotte kind of saves her from. She says, "Did you not think, Mr. Darcy, that I expressed myself uncommonly well just now?" And he says with great energy, "But it is a subject which always makes a lady energetic," which she's talking about a marriage. And Charlotte kind of comes in and says, "Oh, hold up, this might be considered impertinent," and so she gets Lizzie to go play the piano. But in any case, like, Lizzie notices these things and she calls him on it, and you can begin to understand why Darcy might have an affection for her, because she calls him on things that nobody else will, because of his position, because of his wealth, and because of his attitude. And again, this is another huge element of modern romantic comedies, where you have this kind of uppity, obnoxious dude, and the one lady who will call him on it. And that's where that comes from, is this right here. As Lizzie calls Mr. Darcy on his BS, and he doesn't know how to answer it. And so it's captivating to him. So I'm not a dude, so I don't know if this happens with dudes. So, does it?
To get called on your BS?
Yeah.
Yeah, it does. I'm just trying to think if look, you would know. Do I put that much BS out there? I'm trying to think when the last time I got called on it was.
No, and I'm not very good at calling things either. Yeah, I'm a little bit too shy for that. I'm more of a Jane than a Lizzie. But
I used to. When I was really trying, because there's a lot of pressure for men to establish a superiority on the social totem pole. Mm-hmm. And so what happens is that, especially with overeducated men, there's a tendency to peacock and to make very zealous, overreaching claims, and to suck up all the oxygen out of a room in conversations.
Yeah.
And I would have to say that building these online courses or whatever and having this conversation, not only has it taught me, it's been completely humbling in the sense of like, every day something goes wrong, and every day I'm met with my limitations of like how little I know, like, whether it be an audio, a computer, or an intellectual issue. And then I'm also learning so much from so many other people in the course of doing this. And then I don't feel the same need to pontificate as I did before, because I have this channeling of all that intellectual energy. So it makes it, on the whole, very much easier for me to listen. Mm-hmm. And if I can impart anything to any young men who might be listening, you really get ahead in life when you can let other people talk on so many levels. The society tells you you're the one that needs to do all the talking, and you're the one that needs to puff yourself up. But it's good to let other people talk. And the reasons why it's good to let other people talk is that you'll learn a lot about the human psyche that will be invaluable later for you in your dealing with a multitude of relationships and your business calculations. And you just learn so much by letting other people talk and making it less about yourself.
Yeah.
I would like to, just like how you want to communicate certain messages to young women, if I could time travel, teleport, I think that's what I would, if I could somehow shake the younger version of myself, that's what I would try to traumatize into his brain.
Yeah. Yeah. And not only letting people talk, but watching people, mm-hmm. watching their body language, watching their expressions when other people are talking to them. Just watching people will give you enormous insight into how people are. And because, vocalization is only half of it. The rest of it is in these very subtle physical cues.
You got it. Yeah. You're so right. There's like 3 languages being spoken at once.
Exactly. And they're all, and each one is as expressive as the other. Mm-hmm. And it's just the fact that most people have forgotten how to pay attention, because everything is just right there in front of them most of the time.
So how do you feel about me analyzing you as you get really vulnerable with me every week online here?
Well,
you think I got you figured out?
I don't have myself figured out, so I don't think it's possible.
Oh, you're so enigmatic.
Hey, that's my allure, I know. At least I like to think so. But in any case, like I said, though, and that's what Darcy and Lizzie are doing with each other, is they're watching each other and very carefully and analyzing their behaviors, and you find yourself doing that with people that you are particularly fascinated with, whether you like them or not. I know people who I just cannot stand them, but I love to watch them because I'm just like, man, I am so right about this dude, or I'm so right about that girl because she's proven me right now. But in any case, so in any case, they're in this little party, and sometimes in these little parties, Lizzie goes and plays her piano, and then her sister Mary comes and plays, and the two youngest sisters, Lydia and Kitty, talk Mary into playing a dancing song, and so some of the people start to dance. And that did happen in these little small parties. It's not like a ball. You might have like 2 or 3 couples that might dance as somebody else plays the piano, and that did happen on occasion. So that's what's happening here is her 2 sisters are dancing, and Lizzie's just kind of walking. She leaves, I think she leaves Charlotte to go talk to her sisters or something like that. And then Sir William Lucas sees her walking while he's talking to Mr. Darcy. He tries to get Darcy to get her to dance with Darcy. And to Lizzie's astonishment, Darcy actually asks her to dance. But she says, no, I'm not going to. And so basically, Lizzie gives Darcy the shaft here, and so that probably just piqued the interest more. And then along comes while he keeps watching Lizzie after she keeps moving to the other side of the room, and Miss Bennet. Or not Miss Bingley, Caroline Bingley, the unmarried sister of Mr. Bingley, comes up to Darcy. And if it's not already clear, Caroline Bingley is convinced that she should marry Mr. Darcy. And so she does everything in her power to make herself more attractive to Darcy, and she likes to tease him. And and teasing him about Elizabeth Bennet soon becomes one of her favorite pastimes because she's trying to undermine her. She's making fun of her to Darcy, trying to undermine her because Caroline sees that he might be interested in her. And this is the first time that she realizes that may be the case. She comes up to him and basically says, I bet I can guess your thoughts on all of this that's going on. She's sitting here looking down her nose at the sisters dancing and the people that are there. And Darcy says, no, you're probably wrong about what I'm thinking about. And she asks him, what are you thinking about? And he's like, he says, I have been meditating on the very great pleasure which a pair of fine eyes in the face of a pretty woman can bestow. And she asks him who she's talking about, and he says Miss Elizabeth Bennet. And Miss Bingley says, I'm all astonishment. How long has she been such a favorite? And pray, when am I to wish you joy? And that means when are y'all getting married? And I love this quote from Darcy because although it's a little bit insulting to women, it's a little bit true, especially in this day and age, in this time period. He says, that is exactly the question which I expected you to ask. A lady's imagination is very rapid. It jumps from admiration to love, from love to matrimony in a moment. I knew you would be wishing me joy. Nay, if you are so serious about it, I shall consider the matter as absolutely settled. You will have a charming mother-in-law indeed, and of course you will always be at Pemberley with you. He listened to her with perfect indifference, while she chose to entertain herself in this manner. And as his composure convinced her that all was safe, her wit flowed long. She's trying to belittle Elizabeth and her family, and she's doing it in a way where it seems like, oh, I'm just playing with you, but she's actually trying to undermine, and that's one of the things you begin to see about Caroline Bingley, because later on, when Lizzie is staying at Netherfield while Jane is sick, Miss Bennet Miss Bingley. The B's always mess me up here. Miss Bingley is always is always kind of picking at Lizzie and picking at Darcy and just trying to, kind of nip it in the bud, as it were. And she's doing it in kind of an artless way. But in any case, that's the end of chapter 6. And chapter 7 is just a little bit, mainly in chapter 7, what we have is a quick illustration of how, we hear that the militia is quartered in Meryton. This is during this time, the militia was basically the home troops. This is during the Napoleonic Wars, and you had your troops who were off fighting the war, and then you had home troops that were basically defending all the action.
The home front.
Home turf, while the rest of them are away, because there was often a threat against England about being invaded, because they were this was an imperialistic time for England, and they had made a lot of people mad, and so you had the militia quartered in towns around the country, and the militia has come to Meryton, and the two youngest sisters, Kitty and Lydia, are just possessed with all of these handsome men who have shown up in Meryton, and these brave, handsome men who are all soldiers and everything like that. And that's all they can talk about from this moment on, is that the militia's here. And they begin to kind of learn, and they go and visit their Aunt Phillips, who is their mother's sister. And they go and visit her, and they learn a lot about the officers. And then when they come back home, and the younger sisters are talking about Colonel Foster and all these militiamen, Jane gets a letter inviting her to Netherfield to go and have dinner with Caroline Bingley and Mrs. Hurst, or Bingley's sisters. And the letter says that Mr. Bingley and Mr. Darcy are dining with Colonel Foster. And so they're not going to be there. It's just the ladies. And so Jane asks for the carriage. But her mother says, nope, I'm not giving you the carriage. You're going to go on horseback. And here's why. You're going to go on horseback because it looks like it's about to rain. And if it rains, you're going to be forced to spend the night at Netherfield. And I want you to go there and go see Mr. Bingley. Now, this is just ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous, because basically the mother, and back in these days, people would get bad fevers from being out in the wet and the cold and the rain. And so it was kind of dangerous to send somebody out in the rain for too extended a period of time. But the mother says, you're going on horseback, it's going to rain, and because it's going to rain, you're going to have to stay, and you're going to have to see Mr. Bingley. And so this is all her design. And Lizzie, of course, is mortified by this, and it's purposeful. And sure enough, Jane goes off, and it starts to rain. And sure enough, they get a letter from Netherfield saying Jane has gotten a cold. And so now Jane has to stay at Netherfield even longer. And her mother is delighted by this. She's like, oh, she's going to have to stay because she's sick now. And she's going to see Mr. Bingley a lot. And even even Mr. Bennet says, if she should die of of this, if she should die of this fever, then you'll be happy to know that it was all in pursuit of Mr. Bingley. And the mother just won't hear anything of it. She's like, oh, people don't die from trifling colds. It's just ridiculous. So poor Jane ends up sick at Netherfield, and Lizzie. Oh yeah, here's the quote I was like. If your daughter should have a dangerous fit of illness, if she should die, it would be a comfort to know that it was all in pursuit of Mr. Bingley and under your orders. Oh, I am not at all afraid of her dying. People do not die of little trifling colds. She will be taken good care of. As long as she stays there, it is all very well. And Lizzie's mortified, and she says, you know what? I'm going to go see Jane take care of her, because number one, Mama, you're an idiot, and number two, of course she doesn't say this. This is what is implied. Is she's thinking is like, Mom, you're an idiot, and if you're not going to go take care of her, I will. And so Lizzie and the mother tries to talk her out of it. She's like, oh, well, there's nothing at Netherfield for you. You better go and have dinner and go into Meryton and see all these officers Kitty and Lydia are talking about. And Lizzie, of course, being Lizzie, is like, no, I'm going to go see Jane. And that's pretty much and so Lizzie goes there and finds that Jane is really in bad shape. She's got a fever, her throat's sore, and she's just not. She's got a bad cold, and like I said, back in those days, a bad cold was nothing to laugh at. So Jane is pretty sick, and so the ladies at Netherfield and Mr. Bingley offer to let Lizzie stay, and so Lizzie decides to stay with Jane until she's better at Netherfield, and so now Lizzie is at Netherfield, surrounded by the Bingley sisters and Mr. Darcy and Mr. Bingley. So again, I just want to make sure that it's clear that everything that the mother does here is just so utterly. It's really kind of wretched. Because what she does is she purposefully sends her daughter out in the rain just so she can have some time with this fella that she wants her daughter to marry. And it's almost, and it could be construed, and the people at Netherfield would probably see it, that was purposefully done. If they had any sense about them, they see this poor girl coming up on horseback in the middle of a storm, then yeah, they probably would have figured out this was on purpose. And then she ends up with a cold. So basically her mother forced her to get a cold just to get this fella to marry her. And so you begin to see how absolutely ridiculous the mother is. And you begin to see how devoted Lizzie is to Jane. And you begin to see how ridiculous the sisters are for wanting to go and be around a bunch of officers. And how the mother encourages it. She doesn't say, oh, well, be careful around all these men. She says, oh, go enjoy yourself. And so that kind of, back in that day, that would have been considered very poor parenting. And so, in any case, do we want to move on to chapter 8? Do we want to leave it here?
How do you feel? How's your voice? You want to keep going?
Yeah, let's wait until next time to do chapter 8, because remember I told you about that conversation, some of the best conversations in English literature are in the next few chapters.
Well, let's not rush it. Let's bring it to a close right there then. Well, that was fun. I think we covered a lot of ground. A pretty interesting discussion along the way. I slowed us down a little bit with some of this stuff, but I had itching and burning questions to ask. So thank you everyone for listening. Thank you, Jennifer, for leading our discussion. And if you would like Jennifer's tutorial help, if you would like for her editorial help, again, they can get in touch with you at javerysce@gmail.com.
Yes, sir.
All right.
That's it.
javerysce@gmail.com.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you again for listening. Download the Noetic app. Lots of work, lots of updates coming. We're going to create a nice little intellectual ecosystem for everyone. I know it's a long time coming, but hopefully this thing will spread, and then we can make more permanent hires so I don't have to necessarily shill for Jennifer.
That's all right.
Not that I actually don't mind shilling for you. I can do it in full confidence, but it would be nice just to, slide you a little cash and take care of you since you've been so good to help me build this platform. So, anyway, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jennifer. Talk to everybody later.